I think everyone generally accepts now that the Attitude Era had just as many low points as it had high points, and I think the more informed wrestling fan will think twice before spouting out the usual "bring back the Attitude Era" war cry. For sure, the WWF's Attitude Era changed pro wrestling forever, and it brought in a whole lot of new viewers. It also turned a few superstars into absolute legends of the industry, but we tend to look back at certain things with rose-tinted glasses, and I've learned this the hard way through the Reliving the War series. When no stone's left unturned, you're sure to find a lot of garbage. Today, we're going to take a look at the worst rated WWF pay-per-views that took place during the Attitude Era. These pay-per-views were ranked by the folks who visit cagematch.net, and I can guarantee that almost every one of these events will still have one or two matches that were good. Half of the event might even be good, while the other half not so much. And you know, that's the story of the Attitude Era. Great matches and moments mixed in with some bad stuff. Do keep in mind while watching that these are all cage match rankings. These are all scored based on aggregate fan reviews, so you might agree and you might disagree. Use the comment section to share your thoughts. At number 10, we have Rock Bottom in Your House from Vancouver, held on December 13th, 1998. I covered this event recently on my channel and it's very fresh in my mind, so I know exactly why it got ranked so low. Rock Bottom's main event featured a buried alive match between Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Undertaker, and as much as we all love the Rattlesnake and the Dead Man, their main event match here was pretty weak. The guys took a lot of shortcuts in this one, not a lot happens really as they just brawl in and around the ring, and it ends with the guy trying his best to operate a digger and failing miserably, so much so that Steve Austin gets visibly pissed off just before Rock Bottom goes off the air. Every other match on the card ranged from average to bad. Headbangers versus The Oddities, Goldust versus Jeff Jarrett, even Owen Hart versus Steve Blackman should have been better, but it was nothing to get excited about. I thought the Rock vs Mankind WWF Championship match was good though, even if the finish wasn't all that hot. I said in my video review that the title match is a reason to watch Rock Bottom, but unfortunately, it's probably the only reason to watch Rock Bottom. At number 9, it's the 2000 King of the Ring show, Boston, Mass, June 25th. A complaint many people had about this show was that the matches were too short, but that's pretty common for King of the Ring events. And hey, I for one am glad that an evening gown match between Pat Patterson and Jerry Briscoe didn't go past the 3.5 minute mark. I do enjoy the Kurt Angle vs Chris Jericho King of the Ring quarter-final match quite a bit, but yeah, it's not the WWF's best show of 2000 at all, and I do agree that the shorter matches throughout the card makes the event feel a bit messy. There was a chance here for the WWF to hold a Chris Benoit vs Eddie Guerrero semi-final match, but both guys lost their quarter-final contests. Instead, that semi-final match featured Rikishi taking on Val Venus, and it went for just over 3 minutes. Had the WWF removed the evening gown match and took a little time off the main event, a main event that featured Rock and Triple H in the same ring for the 4th pay-per-view in a row, then they could have salvaged something with having Guerrero and Benoit tear it up in the semi-finals, but well, what's done is done. I'm not a big fan of King of the Ring tournaments anyway, so I won't argue this one. A pretty rough show, but do check out Jericho vs Angle. Unforgiven 1998 takes the number 8 spot, held in Greensboro, North Carolina on April 14th. This is another event I covered for Reliving the War, and I said in that video that I enjoyed the opening 6-man tag match that featured The Nation taking on Ken Shamrock, Steve Blackman and Farouk. And I also quite enjoyed the Undertaker vs Kane Inferno match, even though others weren't so keen on it. The main event featured Steve Austin taking on Dude Love, and at the time, I wasn't really into this rivalry at all. The rematch these two had the following month at Over the Edge was a lot better, and it definitely won me over. But even after revisiting the show all these years later, I still wasn't completely sold on Austin vs Dude Love in the Unforgiven main event. That being said, the main event and the Inferno match are much better than everything else on the card. We see LOD 2000 get embarrassed once again by the New Age Outlaws, a Rock and Roll Express versus New Midnight Express match that completely fails to get a reaction from the crowd. Triple H vs Owen Hart should have been better, but that rivalry had run its course by this time. The opening 6-man tag wasn't bad as mentioned, but Unforgiven 1998 isn't a great representation of the Attitude Era overall, and it's hard to recommend this event when there's so many other shows from this era that you could check out instead. I said in my review that WCW Spring Stampede 1998 was better than this. That event took place just before Unforgiven, and we all know WCW pay-per-views of this era could be hit or miss sometimes, so that kinda speaks to the quality of the WWF's Unforgiven show. At number 7, it's WWF Fully Loaded 98, taking place on July 26, 98 in Fresno, California. I'm not sure if I agree with this one if I'm honest, because it has 3 matches that I personally really enjoy. Those matches being the Dungeon match pitting Owen Hart against Ken Shamrock, the 2 out of 3 Falls match for the IC title featuring The Rock defending against Triple H, and I also thought the tag team main event, Undertaker and Steve Austin vs Kane and Mankind, was a good outing for all 4 men, though I did admit when reviewing the show that the match is heavily story driven, and you would get much more out of it if you watched every episode of Raw in the run-up to the event. The 30-minute 2 out of 3 Falls match was great in my opinion, but it seems others don't share the same sentiment, although I fully admit that the show does get dragged way down by Mark Henry vs Vader and the DOA vs LOD tag team match. The main event match was centered around trust. Stone Cold wasn't sure where his tag team partner, The Undertaker, stood, seeing as the Phenom had helped out his little brother on more than one occasion. The Undertaker even cost Stone Cold the WWF Championship in a match against Kane at the King of the Ring 1998 pay-per-view. But the point I'm trying to make here is that this tag match featured a storyline that had been going on for months, and if you went into Fully Loaded without this prior knowledge or without knowing the small seeds that have been planted on weekly television, then you're going to miss out on the whole context of the match. I thought it was good, and I thought there was enough decent matches at Fully Loaded that I actually recommended it when covering the show previously on the channel. Again, it has low points, but I still say it's worth a watch. Unforgiven 1999 comes in at number 6. This show was held on the 26th of September from Charlotte, North Carolina. This one features the infamous Kennel from Hell match. It's funny, but in the absolute worst way possible. Fans were expecting the Boss Man and Al Snow to wrestle inside a death trap, a steel cage surrounded by the Hell in a Cell, and in between the cell there was going to be vicious Rottweilers hungry for human flesh. Instead, fans got a couple of adorable little pooches who decided to pee all around the ring while their owners stood around having a good old laugh. Absolutely abysmal. I didn't think the X-Pac vs Chris Jericho match was all that bad, although the DQ finish was a bit of a letdown. The main event 6-pack challenge match was good in my opinion, with Triple H winning the championship, but the undercard has a lot of filler and a lot of decisions that didn't please the audience in attendance one single bit. China pinning Jeff Jarrett, for example, only for the decision to get reversed, was a bit of a crowd killer. Val Venus vs Steve Blackman was another match that failed to excite the crowd. Edge and Christian vs the New Age Outlaws sounds fantastic on paper, but it dragged on in places. Really, the only saving grace this pay-per-view has is the 6-pack challenge along with Jericho vs X-Pac, if you're able to forgive the ending to that particular semi-main event match. I think this one gets ranked so badly though because of the Kennel from Hell match. I talked about this before, but I think using the steel cage and the Hell in a Cell in a single match is a great idea. The dogs that came along to Unforgiven didn't get the memo though, and it turned into an absolute circus. Al Snow said he wanted professionally trained dogs for this match. The WWF said they were going to use the best puppos available, and, well, they didn't. Survivor Series 99 takes the number 5 spot, Detroit, Michigan, November 14th, 1999. Check out this Survivor Series match, The Big Show vs Mideon, Prince Albert, The Boss Man and Viscera. The Big Show defeated all of these guys in under 1.5 minutes. Wild. There's an 8-woman tag team match that wasn't contested under Survivor Series rules. Instead, it's a sudden death match, and it also ended very abruptly, 1 minute and 53 seconds. Some pretty dark days for women's wrestling right here. The team of Deborah, Moolah, Mae Young and Tori defeated Ivory, Jackie, Luna and Terry. A highlight of the show though is the debut of Kurt Angle. It's a shame his match with Shawn Stasiak's nothing to write home about, but still, it's the beginning of one of wrestling's most noteworthy debuts and a really successful year for Kurt Angle. There's also some fun to be had in the final Survivor Series match of the evening. Crash Holly, Hardcore Holly and Too Cool taking on the Hardy Boys and Edge and Christian. This was a pretty fast-paced encounter and the guys involved didn't let up at all, but still, it's not really a match that you'd go out of your way to watch, you know. Chris Jericho tried his best to get a good match out of China, but it was sloppy in places. And then we've got the main event. Stone Cold Steve Austin got knocked down by a car during the show and he therefore couldn't compete in the scheduled main event. This was originally going to be a triple threat match that pitted Austin against WWF Champion Triple H and The Rock. The Big Show was added to the match, Austin was taken out, and the fans naturally chanted Austin's name throughout the main event. The match had a lot of interference, which was par for the course during this era, but it was maybe a little overdone as we got DX interference, Vince McMahon interference, and Shane McMahon also ended up serving as a replacement referee. In the end, the Big Show won the WWF Championship, and the match isn't necessarily bad, but I think most would have preferred Steve Austin working the match instead of the Big Show. Whatever way you cut it, it's a pay-per-view bait and switch, but hey, it wasn't the first time, and it sure wouldn't be the last time either. At number 4, we've got Armageddon 1999, taking place the month after Survivor Series, December 12th, 99. Coming from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, some of the matches at this show actually look really good on paper. Kane vs X-Pac inside a steel cage, The Rock and Sock Connection versus the New Age Outlaws. We've even got Kurt Angle versus Steve Blackman, for crying out loud. How on earth could this be bad? Well, there's a 4-way evening gown match that takes place in a pool for a start. Miss Kitty versus Ivory versus Jacqueline versus BB. Yeah, I bet you forgot about BB. Overseeing this action is the Fabulous Moolah and Mae Young, and it's matches like this that make you appreciate how far we've come in terms of women's wrestling. Miss Kitty even flashes the crowd at the end of the match, and it was all caught on the pay-per-view feed. The Big Show has his first pay-per-view title defense at this show, and he ends up beating the Big Boss Man in 3 minutes. That was a letdown for sure. But on the flip side of this short WWF title match, you've got a Triple H versus Vince McMahon main event that's given almost 30 minutes from bell to bell. It's pretty insane when you think about it. That being said, the end of the Triple H vs Vince match was memorable. It kick-started the McMahon-Helmsley era when Stephanie turned her back on Vince to join Triple H. But 30 minutes for a Vince McMahon match is a little too much, and do keep in mind that Vince was the babyface here. You could maybe tolerate long Vince matches if he's being a dirty heel bastard. Angle vs Blackman was okay, it was nothing special. Same goes for X-Pac vs Kane. The Hollies vs Rikishi and Viscera was pretty dreadful. The crowd hated the DQ finish during the Rock and Sock tag team match. Jericho did manage to get a better match out of China this time around, and the opening tag team battle royal is pretty entertaining. But too much of this show feels mediocre, and it was already slogging pretty bad even before the long drawn out main event. One reviewer said that Armageddon 99 feels terribly dated, but it would have been fun to watch back then. And yeah, I don't remember complaining about this show at the time. Nowadays though, it doesn't hold up very well at all. The third worst WWF pay-per-view of the Attitude Era, according to the guys and girls at CageMatch.net, is WrestleMania 15, held in Philadelphia on March 28th, 99. I remember thinking to myself all those years ago that Mania 15 didn't really feel like a WrestleMania. The thing that stuck out the most to me was the whole Chyna and Triple H angle. We thought Chyna had rejoined D-Generation X when she turned her back on Kane, but it turned out that Triple H had actually turned his back on DX when he joined Chyna in the corporation. I mean, it was pulled off pretty well and it was kinda shocking too, but having this story play out over 2 WrestleMania matches seemed odd. I don't know. It felt like it would have been more suited to an episode of Raw and not on the biggest show of the year. What's more, they didn't necessarily push Triple H really hard until a few months later, so it took a pretty long time for the whole stunt to actually start paying off. The story of the main event also played out over 2 matches. There's the main event itself, of course, but earlier on, Mankind wrestled Paul White to see who would referee the final match on the card. WrestleMania and the matches that happen within WrestleMania should never be overbooked in my opinion, and I think that's why this show never really felt like a Mania to me. It's really all over the place. There's a Hell in a Cell match here too, one that ends with the Boss Man hanging from the cell structure. This is what most people remember from this particular match, but I remember it being the worst cell match the WWF had produced up until that point. I loved Hell in a Cell, and the Ministry Undertaker got me into the Dead Man's character once again, but I felt this Undertaker vs Boss Man match was a bit of a letdown. What else? Oh yeah, Butterbean versus Bart Gunn. Poor Bart Gunn. You all know the story behind this one, and it's an absolute shame what the WWF did to Bart. But I guess if you like seeing wrestlers get knocked out cold by outsiders looking for a quick payday, then this is the match for you. The main event is great though. It's the beginning of the Rock vs Austin WrestleMania trilogy, and while I don't think it's their best Mania match, it's still very, very entertaining. But overall, WrestleMania 15 serves as a stark reminder that the Attitude Era and the booking style of the Attitude Era had a way of killing off traditional sensibilities. The show didn't need to be so overbooked. WrestleMania to me is all about the bell-to-bell action because the story should already be told from the Royal Rumble onwards. Hell, I even enjoyed the chaos of the 1999 Royal Rumble, but having that same chaos bleed into WrestleMania was something I didn't care for at all. It's not the worst WrestleMania of all time, but it's the worst of the Attitude Era. At number 2, it's the 1999 King of the Ring, held in Greensboro, North Carolina on the 27th of June. The same complaints are echoed here when it comes to King of the Ring pay-per-views. Too many short matches and nothing of substance. Pretty much everyone's in agreement that none of the King of the Ring matches delivered. There was some fun to be had when China met Road Dogg in a quarter-final match, but overall it was one of the most uneventful King of the Ring tournaments WWF had ever held. When the DX Army started to really catch on with fans, Billy Gunn was just as popular as anyone else in the group. In late 1998 and early 99, he was given a pretty decent TV push, and he always got great reactions during his singles matches. When the heel Billy Gunn went on to win King of the Ring, I'm guessing many of the higher-ups thought this would be the perfect opportunity to push him to the next level, and well, that didn't really happen, did it? Some people like to blame The Rock for killing Billy's push with just one promo, but this is nothing he couldn't overcome with the help of some favourable booking. Yeah, though, I do agree that watching the 1999 King of the Ring tournament in hindsight feels like a giant waste of time because nothing really comes of it. It feels more like a disappointment because during the early days of the Attitude Era, Billy Gunn was very much over, there's no denying it. The Rock faced The Undertaker in a WWF title match that was unfortunately a bit slow in places. It goes for 20 minutes and you just know both men are capable of so much more. But there's 2 matches on this card that I definitely think's worth watching. Those being the tag team match pitting the Hardy Boys versus Edge and Christian, and the 2-on-1 ladder main event that sees Vince and Shane McMahon battle Stone Cold Steve Austin with control of WWF being up for grabs. The Hardy Boys versus Edge and Christian gives us a small glimpse into the future. These guys worked incredibly well together, and you can tell that they were very eager to push each other to the next level. And the main event handicap match is typical Austin versus McMahon nonsense, which means it's a whole lot of fun, and the crowd eats up every moment of it. Granted, the end of the match confused fans when the briefcase began to rise when Stone Cold went to grab it, but take away all that and the main event isn't terrible at all. I still get a kick out of it. The problem this pay-per-view has though is the King of the Ring tournament itself. Everyone likes to point out how bad the 1995 King of the Ring was, but the 1999 tournament is extremely dull and it leads to nothing. The worst pay-per-view of the Attitude Era, as voted by wrestling fans on cagematch.net, is Over the Edge 99, held in Kansas City, Missouri on the 23rd of May 1999. One of the darkest days in not only wrestling but in the world of entertainment as a whole. This show lives on in infamy due to a terrible incident that resulted in a man losing his life. Owen Hart was scheduled to take on The Godfather while wrestling under the Blue Blazer moniker. The Blazer was supposed to make his entrance while descending from the rafters, however his harness line malfunctioned and Owen fell just under 80 feet into the ring. Watching this show live is one of the most vivid memories I have as a wrestling fan because you just didn't believe it. The incident was thankfully not broadcasted live, but the cameras would pan around the audience while JR said on commentary that there was some sort of major problem. It took a few minutes for Ross to reveal to fans what had happened while Jerry Lawler went to check on Owen to see how bad it was. When Jerry returns to the commentary table, he has the most terrified look on his face as he says, "It doesn't look good at all." I'll never forget seeing this, and yeah, it's very heartbreaking. Owen was brought to hospital. JR told fans at home later on that Owen had passed away, but there was no announcement made to the fans who attended the event. What's worse is the fact that the show continued on as normal, with wrestlers having to perform while under a lot of visible stress after what happened to one of their brothers. The WWF didn't release the show on home video, but an edited version was uploaded to the WWE Network. All mentions of Owen were removed from the edit, and they even took out Jeff Jarrett and the Road Dogg, saying they were praying for Owen before their matchups. Vince McMahon famously said that Owen would have wanted the show to go on, but I can't imagine that kind of conversation ever coming up in a locker room before Over the Edge aired on pay-per-view. And speaking of Vince, he and the WWF would come under a lot of scrutiny over how they handled this tragic incident as a full-blown investigation was launched, spearheaded by Owen's widow Martha. The matches that happen at this show don't matter. The wrestlers struggle to perform as they normally would due to what happened. At the end of the day, a man died during a wrestling pay-per-view, and no wrestling show should take precedence over human life. You know the drill, share your thoughts in the comment section below and let me know what Attitude Era shows didn't do it for you. Do you agree with the folks over at cagematch.net? Did you think they were a little too harsh? Let me know and I'll take a look over your comments after the video gets uploaded. Thanks for watching guys, and please take care.